This is part 2 of my Foghorn for Game Update 092. Part 1 covered the European Destroyer event, so be sure to go and find that if you haven't seen it already. Part 3 will cover the patch notes after they arrive on Tuesday afternoon EU time. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the overhaul to ship armor plating and the IFHE skill, which arrives in 092. You might want a notepad and pen, and I definitely need a paracetamol. Update 092 hits this week on Wednesday for NA and CIS and Thursday for C and EU. With it comes the so-called IFHE rework, although it has as much to do with plating changes and HE penetration changes as the IFHE skill. This is a very complex change, and undoubtedly no one fully understands all the implications of this change, particularly for specific ships. There will likely be specific ship-on-ship interactions which are unusual following this change. Some ships may become unduly strong or weak, and Wargaming will address any issues like that which arrive during future updates. If something disastrous happens, no doubt there'll be a hotfix. All that being said, the whole point of this rework is actually to have very little impact on the game. Most of the changes to penetration go hand in glove with changes to the way HE penetration is calculated, meaning the overall impact is 0. However, there will be some intentional differences when this update hits. I'll go through the changes, including the changes to the changes, and try to highlight what these mean in general. I'm not intending to analyse every ship in depth and point out every single ship versus ship difference. No doubt you'll hear about anything interesting via the communities you engage with, Discord, Reddit, and so on. Instead, I'll go through what the changes are so you understand mechanically what's changing and some of the implications. For this video, I'll be putting notes up on the screen, so we're going to need a bit more space. Perfect, let's dive in. I'll start with the plating changes. First of all, battleship platings at tiers 6 and 7 have been slightly altered to make sure that the HE and IFHE changes I'll talk about later don't allow cruisers to penetrate with HE any differently to before update 092. These battleship plating changes are therefore neutral, there's no practical difference. Now cruisers. These changes mostly affect how cruisers interact with larger caliber AP rounds and are intended to allow cruisers to survive AP volleys better with good angling, by reducing the instances of overmatching of side and deck armor. It also increases the survivability difference between light and heavy cruisers. When I talk about bouncing AP here, I'm referring to the situation when an AP shell which cannot overmatch a plate ricochets off when the plate is heavily angled. If you're not sure about this mechanic, go and study it in the wiki or find the How It Works videos from Wargaming. If you don't understand overmatching and ricochets, you might struggle with what I'm about to talk about. I'm not talking about AP shattering on a perpendicular plate. Broadsiding cruisers will still get punished by AP after these changes. Don't forget that the overmatch calculation is the AP caliber divided by 14.3. This gives you the overmatch value of the shell. There's no shame in watching this video with a calculator in your hand. Okay, let's get started. Tier 4 and 5 cruisers, except British light cruisers, will have their central plating changed from 13 to 16 mm. This means they can bounce up to 229 mm AP shells off their central plating instead of the old 186 mm. This means battleships at tiers 3 to 6 still very much overmatch all cruisers. The difference is that these cruisers can now bounce 8-inch AP from ships like Furutaka and Exeter, London and Devonshire, if they angle slightly. Note that for all these cruiser plating changes I'm talking about in this video, the nose and stern armor isn't changed. So going completely nose in will still mean you get citadeled because nose and stern armor will still be overmatched. In this case, at tier 4 and 5, 203mm shells will still overmatch the 13mm nose. For this reason, after this update, learning about which ships can overmatch your nose, but not your side or deck, will greatly benefit cruiser players. I highly recommend that you study penetration mechanics, look at ship armor models, and start learning ship gun calibers. Knowing when to present the smallest target when something completely overmatches you, and when to angle when they only overmatch your nose or stern will be an even more valuable skill than it has been up until now. Okay, continuing with the plating changes. Cruisers at tiers 6 and 7 will have various parts of the central armour increased to 25mm from 16 or 19mm. Heavy cruisers, those with 190mm or greater guns, will get 25mm decks and side plating. Light cruisers just get the 25mm decks. Devonshire and Surrey just get the side plating. Again, noses and sterns are not changed. The effect of this is that where previously these ships could only bounce 229 or 272mm AP, now they can bounce up to 357mm AP off their new 25mm armour. This effect will be most noticeable for the heavies, which will be able to angle against the lower caliber battleships, moving the nose slightly out of line and using the side armour to bounce AP. But remember, battleships with guns above 357mm still overmatch 25mm, so again it's time to do some learning. Can Ismail overmatch my side plating? No, it's 356mm dividing by 14.3 tells me I should angle. Can Bayern? Yes, it's 380mm dividing by 14.3 tells me I should run away or present a smaller target. Knowledge is power. Tier 8 and 9 cruisers get the same treatment, with their plating going from 25mm to 27mm. Light cruisers get a thicker deck, heavy cruisers get deck and side plating, and Cheshire, Drake and Albemarle just get the side plating. These cruisers go from bouncing 357mm AP to bouncing 386mm AP off their 27mm plates. This, for example, means angling against Tier 8 ships like Bismarck, Tirpitz and Richelieu now becomes possible as they have 380mm guns. However, try that with Alabama's 406s and you'll regret it. Again, learn the gun calibers. Finally, at Tier 10, there are no general changes, but two specific changes. Colbert and Smolensk get their central plating reduced from 30mm to 16mm, meaning they can no longer bounce battleship or super heavy cruiser shells. You'll still overpen them, but at least you won't get bounces. The biggest change will be for cruiser and destroyer guns. Both HE and AP should now be a lot more effective against these ships. Salem and Des Moines get a very interesting change. Their central plating is increased from 27mm to 30mm. Again, this does not affect the bow or stern, but means Des Moines and Salem can bounce up to 429mm AP, so most battleships off their side plating. Flambas and I tested this extensively in the training room on PTS and concluded that the skillful and knowledgeable DM player will be able to angle against battleships with guns below 429mm, avoid most citadels, and survive significantly longer while bow tanking, something which wasn't previously possible against battleships with guns over 386mm, which at Tier 10 is most of them. Which battleships still overmatch? Musashi, Georgia, Yamato, Thunderer, Ohio, Kremlin, and Republique. Don't try and angle against those ones. Next up is changes to the way HE penetration is calculated. First of all, most guns in the game use the 1/6 rule for calculating HE penetration, i.e., you take the caliber and divide by 6 to find the HE penetration, plus a little detail I'll cover shortly. In 092, Tier 8-10 cruisers with 152 or 155mm guns, previously using the 1/6 rule, will now use a 1/5 rule, divide the caliber by 5 instead of 6. This goes along with a change to the actual calculation. Up until now, the answer to that calculation had to be that the penetration value of the HE had to be greater than the armour thickness. Now, a penetration value equal to the armour thickness will penetrate. This has the effect of increasing the HE penetration value by 1mm for most HE. This is why some mid-tier battleships are having plating changes to make sure HE that previously shattered still shatters on them. Across most of the library of ships in the game, this simply means a slight increase to HE penetration, but this doesn't make any practical difference in most cases. No significant boundaries are crossed. Most ships' HE will behave the same way it always did. There are a few exceptions though. The change to 1/5 penetration on the Tier 8, 10, 152 and 155mm cruisers means they will pen 30 and 31mm respectively without IFHE, Previously, this was 24mm without IFHE. Their plating is changing a little from the previous values, but not to 30 or 31mm. This will mean that cruisers previously shattering HE on each other will now penetrate without IFHE. This makes IFHE much less necessary on these ships, freeing up 4 commander points for use in other skills. They'll still need IFHE to penetrate 32mm armour, but now a non-IFHE light cruiser is a more viable choice. Note that penetration of IJN 100mm guns will be increased to 30mm from 25, but this is simply to keep the status quo and doesn't mean any significant performance change. Tier 6 and 7 German 105mm secondaries are having their pen increased to 26mm from 18mm to be in line with the other tiers, i.e. a change from 1/6 to 1/4 pen. Again, due to the plating changes at these tiers, this shouldn't be a significant change, as they previously penetrated old cruiser armour values and will still penetrate new cruiser armour. There's one more exception I'd like to point out. British destroyers with 113mm guns, like other ships, see their penetration with HE increase by 1mm thanks to the changing calculation algorithm. However, for Daring and Jutland, this does cross a significant threshold. Other destroyers and battleship superstructure is 19mm plating. Previously, players were practically obliged to take IFHE to be able to use HE effectively in destroyer fights and when spamming battleships. These changes mean that Jutland and Daring no longer have to take IFHE and thus free up 4 valuable points to put in other skills. Radio location is the obvious one which springs to mind. Daring and Jutland are about to get a rather significant buff. Finally, the thing which has become the namesake of this change, but actually is only 1/3 of it, changes to the IFHE skill. One of the main goals of this rework is to make IFHE less necessary on certain types of ships via the changes I've already mentioned, and also by making the penalties of the skill itself more harsh. The benefit of IFHE was previously plus 30% HE penetration. It will now be plus 25%. You may have seen something about different values for different tiers, but this was removed and now all tiers will get a 1.25 modifier instead of the old 1.3. The way the complete HE penetration calculation will therefore work is gun caliber divided by the value for that ship, 1/6, 5th or quarter. Importantly, the value is first rounded and then the IFHE modifier is applied. How do I know this? By using the example of a tier 8 to 10, 1/5 penetration, 152mm cruiser under the changes, and Wargaming's notes about 38mm plating. 152mm divided by 5 is 30.4. Multiply this by 1.25 without rounding and you get exactly 38mm. But due to the new rule of equal to or less than, this would mean 152mm tier 8 to 10 cruisers would penetrate 38mm of armour, but the patch notes say the 25% change to IFHE penetration at tiers 8 to 10, down from 30%, was implemented to prevent penetration of 38mm armour. So the algorithm must be 152mm divided by 5, giving 30.4, then rounded to 30, then multiplied by 1.25, giving 37.5, which being less than 38mm under the new rules, does not pen 38mm armour. High-tier American battleships with 38mm armour breathe a sigh of relief. Interestingly though, it does penetrate 37mm armour. What has that? North Carolina. I suspect she might be getting a plating buff to 38 very soon. The situation is a bit different for 105mm guns at those tiers, i.e. Mogami. Mogami will penetrate 38mm with IFHE, and so I think you may see a specific nerf to Mogami of some kind in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, take her out with IFHE loaded and hunt American battleships. The other part of the IFHE change is the part intended to make it less desirable and make it more of a genuine choice than something mandatory on light cruisers and some destroyers. The new IFHE skill will halve the fire chance instead of reducing it by 1 or 3%. That's half of the base chance before the application of signals and demolition expert. This means that ships with high base fire chance, such as heavy cruisers and battleships, will suffer most from this. Ships where the base value is low won't see a huge difference in fire chance, since half of, say, 6% is 3%, and 6% minus 1 or 3, as per the current version of the skill, is only 5 or 3 anyway. It's about the same. However, if you're a battleship with a 40% fire chance, that immediately goes down to 20%, which is a massive difference. Previously appealing builds like IFHE Yoshino suddenly become a lot less appealing because you pay for your additional penetration with a massive reduction in fire chance. I hope that's helped a little, and I hope you're not too confused. If you still don't get it, go and read the patch notes and maybe watch this again, or look for videos from other community members. I'm honestly still processing this, and we all have a lot of learning to do. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the comments below, and I'll keep an eye on them for the first day or two that the video is live. But the best place to be is the StatsBloke Discord, where a growing army of helpful players is ready to help you learn about the game. Link in the description. Be sure to read the welcome information carefully in order to get access to the full Discord. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. Please do subscribe and ring the notification bell, as the third and final part of this update, covering the 092 patch notes, will be out very shortly. Take care of each other, and I'll speak to you then.